Welcome to Vets to PM's Military Transition Academy podcast, the show where we discuss how to succeed in transitioning from the military service to the civilian workforce. This show and the academy it represents helps veterans transition into meaningful, lucrative post-service careers. Your primary host is Eric Doc Wright, PhD, certified manager, military veteran, serial founder, best-selling business author, philosopher, linguist, and coach. Your other host is Jeremy Burdick, project management professional, scrum master, product owner, and retired Air Force chief, and the current COO of Vets to PM and the Professional Development Unit University, where we will interview veterans successful in corporate America and business to bring you nuggets of wisdom every episode to make you more successful. Next, let's introduce today's guest. Our special guest today is Adam Dillon, and he's U.S. Army from 1995 to 2005 as an enlisted Aviation Special Forces Pipeline and PSYOP Q-Course Graduate, 18 Delta and 37 Foxtrot. With 2 combat tours in Iraq as a Tactical PSYOP Team Leader, he also has 1 tour in Korea along with multiple SOF missions in other locations. Adam was also a U.S. Coast Guard Reserve officer from 2005 to 2009 with the Wilmington Marine Safety Unit. He has served in various corporate roles and overseas contracting, then recommissioned in 2005 with the South Carolina Guard on the division staff as the safety officer. He developed current plans, policies, and procedures for the risk management for emergency operations and then retired in 2022. Since then, Adam opened an OSPREY Safety Solutions, OSPREY Safety Solutions, after working as a project manager on the BP oil spill in 2010. He currently consults and advises veteran-owned and Fortune 500 companies around the globe in emergency and health services and risk solutions. Super excited to hear everything he's got to say. It's a great show. I can't wait to get started.
I'm talking about if you and I and JB, and who are we fooling? It'll be you two lads doing it. JB's the wizard about setting up pipelines. But if we set up pipelines, because most of our guys and gals, Adam, are this, they're E6, E7 to 05-ish, right? So they've got experience running shops and they've got experience running mission, right? Especially our operators, which is your world. So I guess what I'm saying is we even have a relationship with the National Building Safety Code Enforcement Inspection Group, CCI or whatever they are. So how many guys and gals do you think we could place into that safety profession or the code inspection profession a year? Dozen, couple hundred, couple thousand?
We're talking hundreds because there are job openings all over the country for code enforcement. The EH&S profession are constantly looking for entry-level people to go onto construction sites, to go into Lay's potato chip, Frito-Lay. I just throw those companies out because there are constant openings for environmental health and safety professionals all over the country. My personal company, I like to take non-commissioned officers, and especially just because, not to say that I won't take commissioned officers to do it, but NCOs, guys who have battle staff, guys who have command staff experience, those type of people can go into any type of company and understand how to read a room. They know how to get into a staff. They know general leadership, basic leadership. I can teach them how to do the job. It's hard to teach leadership and staff experience. For instance, a job that I just finished up with Thermo Fisher Pharmaceuticals was a huge 150,000 square foot multi-level facility for Operation Warp Speed, where we were building a COVID vaccine production facility. And my company contracted to provide EH&S support for them, and I needed more personnel. So I knew a Marine Corps gunny who was coming out of Marine Aviation Safety. He had the basic safety knowledge background, but being a Marine Corps gunny in E7, he had the battle staff experience. He had the joint staff experience. I could plug him into a staff position there with the construction management staff, and he could have the backbone to walk into a room full of construction professionals and hold his own. So I got him in there. I taught him the lay of the land and let him run with it. And it just took getting him up to speed on some of the OSHA updates. And then he was rocking and rolling within a couple of weeks. And he took that job and ran with it and did very well with it. So that's things I have done with military professionals all over the country, putting them in positions like that.
So cool. So I guess, Adam, to kind of introduce JB to you and your company and whatever. So JB, a little bit of background, brother. And for those of you out there in MTA Podcast Nation listening and or watching. So I met Adam. It was a really cool event, man. So cool. I met Adam on the fantail of the second most decorated naval destroyer in the fleet. It was for the FAVOB event. The Florida Association of Veteran-Owned Businesses was commissioning the brand new shiny Jacksonville chapter. And so there was, I don't know, Adam, gee whiz, man, what, 2, 3, 5 dozen people there, a couple of local officials, municipality. And we had a chapter opening ceremony, and it was absolutely amazing. I hadn't stepped on a fleet ship since 1994, last time I left a gangplank. It was absolutely amazing to board that ship. But anyway, dude, that's what we were doing. That's how we met. So Adam, how did you go from, I'm standing there on the fantail, I meet Adam. How in the world do you go from special operations to environmental health and safety, or the EHS industry, to business owner, dude? There's gotta be some stories in that thing.
Yeah. And I'll give you a little backstory. A lot of people throw the term special operations out. I do that because I am fully qualified in that field. I started out in Army Aviation as a young enlisted soldier over 20 years ago. I was an electrician and armament tech on Apache helicopters. Did my enlisted time, and then I actually got accepted to the Army Special Forces qualification course. Went through the SF Q-Course, qualified for 18 Delta, and then after 9/11, was asked to transition over to the 37 Fox Psychological Operations Q-Course, went through that, went through the PSYOP Q-Course, and took over a psychological operations team, got assigned back over to 5th Group with the Siege of Sodif, and went into Iraq. Did a couple tours in Iraq, and then left active duty as an E7, took a Reserve Coast Guard commission, did a couple years there, and then had a break in service, went back in the South Carolina National Guard. And by that time had decided to go into the corporate world, following my father and my grandfather's footsteps, who were Navy veterans. They had been in occupational health and safety since the 60s, back when the mafia used to run it. So it was third generation. And that was a very good career field to follow. So I worked in-house with a couple of Fortune 500 companies, and then decided to start my own company. And in doing that, through the transition after about 2005, when I left active duty and went to the Guard and Reserve, saw that a lot of veterans were having a hard time finding skill sets, finding jobs, finding work, and got involved with some nonprofits in the Carolinas and across the country. Worked with Salesforce to help them set up VetForce, IAVA, Vets in Tech, Wounded Warriors with their Wars to Work program, and with the Charlotte Bridge Home, which is now the Veterans Bridge Home. Got on the board of directors for Veterans Path Up, and am now working with FAVOB here in Florida. And one of the things I like to do is help veterans get jobs, not just say, hey, here's your skill set, but actually say, this is what it's going to take to transition into the corporate world, because I've been dealing with that for the last 15, almost 20 years. And, the pains and struggles I went through, this is what I do. And because I do own a company, if they are looking to get into the corporate world, I can put them on my corporate roster to show that they have a job. I've done that for some of my friends in SOF, some of the PSYOP guys, some of the SF guys, and some of the SEALs I've worked with. I've put them on my corporate roster to show that they are employees. So when they go for their first job interview, they can say, hey, I already work for OSPREY Safety. I work for Global OSPREY. And then I can be their interview contact. When their company calls and says, we need someone to vouch for you, then they can call and say, yeah, they work for me. They've been my operations liaison for the last year. Master Sergeant so-and-so has worked for me, and I can vouch for the guy, because not only did I go to combat with the guy, but I've known the guy for 20 years.
And you, Adam, something so amazing too. So being in the transition fight is, in my humble opinion, a worthy cause, right? Because we all, regardless of length of service, branch of service, whatever, military occupation, whatever, we all went from civilian to soldier, sailor, airman, Marine in a transformative, immersive event that was instruction manual based. There ain't one coming out on the backside, man. They slap yellow paint on us, call us a school bus, and that's what they sell the civilian workforce. And well, good luck on a transition, baby. Now, I'm not saying that the program today that the folks at DOL and TAPS and stuff are running is not great. It's better than nothing, that's for sure. And it's a hell of a lot better than the one I went through in 1994 and 2003. That's for sure. But it's not the immersive instruction manual based event like, here's how to quit saluting. Here's how to quit knife handing. Here's how to stand so that you still have military bearing, but your feet aren't at 45 and your shoulders aren't back. And like, so you don't intimidate folks and make them cry. Right. Like, so the transition is rough enough as it is, but being a guardsman myself, talking to thousands of guardsmen, working with guys at the NGB when I was at DFAS, that's my father-in-law being retired airman. I mean, that's a really wicked transition too, because you never quite transition. You're never quite a civilian professional because they don't like you taking 2 weeks off. And that's what they think. They think it's off. They think it's paid time off, like you're on the beach or something. They don't like you going to the VA for your appointments. They might say they do, but they don't. You're messing up the operational day. And you don't really have a career necessarily in the Guard either because you're a part-timer. So you got to find an AGR slot or whatever. It just seems like, so there's a bunch of sailor, soldier, airmen, Marines that are kind of in a career limbo. They're that classic jack of all trades, master of none. Right. And they're trying to hold down 2 careers, like holding down one isn't enough. I mean, do you guys see that on your end? Did you see that coming and going in between the Guard and all that stuff too?
Yeah, I did. When I first left active duty in 2005, I had built up a little savings and was looking to, unfortunately, after a few combat missions, and I think my brothers and sisters out there with children can understand, it was hard to want to go back and do those things when I had kids, and I didn't want to leave my children. There's a photo behind me of my wife's son who was KIA in Afghanistan. So I'm married to a Gold Star mom, so we can understand how those things affect our families. And my parents were police officers at the time. So while I was finishing my master's degree, it was a natural transition to go into law enforcement. That sometimes is as hard as being a soldier. And it just didn't allow for much expansion of me personally to grow. And I wanted to really get into the corporate world and get into operations and actually make some money, do something where I wasn't working a 80-hour shift for 40-hour pay and getting shot at. And, I think we can understand how that is. So I only worked about 3 years and got into some heavy narcotics, finding them, not doing them. And I transitioned out of law enforcement because I finally got into the corporate world. And once I got in, I started running into some of these roadblocks that we find where at the time, even in the early 2000s, we had corporate hiring managers that didn't understand some of the HR issues that led me to go get a SHRM certification, where I had hiring managers that flat out said, we're not going to hire you because you're a veteran. And we're not going to hire you because you're a combat veteran. We're scared of you. And that's just very, very illegal. We know they can't do that, but I didn't know that. So that caused me to want to go get human resources certifications to help other veterans to know what to listen for in job interviews and know how to avoid those things. And now, as part of my consulting company, I consult companies to go, hey, you can't do that. One, you can't even talk about their military background, much less deny them employment based on that. But what that has led to is I did some work with Compass Group a few years ago to not only help hire veterans, but to build a program for once they hired veterans to help them on the back end for their transition after employment if they ran into any issues, including psychological issues for combat veterans or PTSD after the hiring process, to know how to deal with that. And we developed a program for senior managers to know how to communicate and deal with veterans inside the workforce. And I say that because I've worked in corporations where they've asked me after meetings and go, why are you talking? What is circle back around? And what is 10,000 foot level? And, why did you say you were going to call for fire during the meeting? And I said, let me translate a lot of that for you. But we find in corporate meetings now that they use those terms, and those terms have come from the military and they become part of corporate knowledge. So dealing with these corporations now, where there's a mom and pop company or a Fortune 500 company, as we have millions of veterans now, just like we did after World War II, going from Desert Storm into OEF, OIF, and now Syria, we have tons and tons of 20 to 30 to 40-year-old veterans going into the workforce. And the companies now understand that they can take that young 24-year-old Marine corporal and put him into a leadership position, and they will excel. They will run with the ball, but they also have to understand how to talk to them. And if you take that person and mold them and educate them, then you have a management material person sitting right there in front of you. And all you have to do is give them the tools and know how to talk to them and educate them to mold them into that person you want them to be.
Amen, brother.
Yeah, that's really cool. I really, there's a couple things that just stand out from the very beginning. And I know we kind of just jumped in there. So but it's really cool because it's a different way to start this. And there was a lot of great information in there and how you can tangibly help somebody that's listening to this and what they can do. But I also wanted to point out one thing that I thought was really stand up that you did was, you're being an advocate by putting someone on your corporate role. Too many times we get fun. Like I get them for even our skill bridge folks that roll through verification of employment. And these bigger companies, they farm it out. So they don't have a clue what's going on. So I got a call from India last week. And guy's saying, is this guy one of your employees? Well, then I'm like, let me think about it for just a second. Yeah, he was a skill bridge resident and intern, not necessarily a paid employee, but completely part of our program, part of our company. So we verified his employment that way. But I didn't even consider the value until last week. And then you said it again. So how cool is that? Of having an advocate out there verifying that you are, one, who you say you are, but then two, an advocate for you to get employment on the backside. So I just wanted to commend you on that. I never even realized how big of a resource that is. And then two, for anybody watching the video, what is in the background jumping around from leaf to leaf back there? What do we got? A lizard?
Oh, yeah. I turned the lights off. Those are my wife's other kids back there. She is a executive business banker, and you'd never think that she has a bunch of dinosaurs in the room, but she has a chameleon in the back, and she has a bearded dragon up there, and so those are her kids that are back there. So I married into a family of lizards. So yeah, she's got some critters back there, and if you look over on the other side, you'll see a Ukrainian battle flag. We have a large Ukrainian population here in our neighborhood, and we've been supporting some of those families with some medical supplies and some stuff that we've been sending over to the front there. So in thanks, they sent us a signed flag from the front. So we got a flag and it's a video for some guys thanking us for helping them over there. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, how cool. Yeah, I just noticed, I was like, man, I gotta bring it up because otherwise someone watching the video will want to know what it is. But anyway, if you're just listening, he's got a cool tank in the back, and that thing is pretty active for a reptile or amphibian or whatever. But that's
the plug for my wife's critters. So
right there you go. So something else that you started to go down into was in the job interviews, and then how there is some discrimination out there for veterans and combat veterans, especially. What were some of the tips and tricks that you would tell people, or at least educate them on during this interview when they do get asked that question? How should they respond? What would be something that you would advise?
Well, personally, for me, it got to the point where I was barely even listing military on my resume. If before I really got involved with my own company, but if I was going in-house with another company, if I was clicking on a computer and it said, click veteran, then, some companies give a veteran's preference. But if I went in and they started asking about my background, then I would just tell them, I did so many years in the military, and I would leave it at that. And they go, well, tell us about that. And I go, well, I just have a lot of leadership experience and operational experience and technical knowledge. And I'd say, well, let me just tell you how that translates into corporate experience. And I would never, ever talk about any type of combat experience. And if the hiring manager or the HR manager tried to bring it up, I would say, I don't think that's appropriate for the interview, but it took me years to discuss that and learn how to bring that up. I did get recruited for one company here in the U.S. And during the interview, the senior manager for the EH&S department of that company, turns out that he was a previous E4 in the Army. And he brought it up and said, hey, I see that you took a commission. And I said, well, I don't think that's really appropriate for the job interview. And it turned out that he wound up being intimidated by that, and that caused me to lose the job. So those are issues. The only reason that I ever went from enlisted to the officer side was because of the corporate side. A lot of corporate hiring managers don't understand the amazing amount of education and leadership ability that our enlisted military has. They don't know the difference between a non-commissioned and a warrant officer and a commissioned officer, and they don't understand that a staff sergeant in Army Special Operations has immensely much more leadership capability than a young junior officer coming out of some of the other branches and services. So it just depends on what the position is, regardless of what the rank is. And that a lot of people don't understand that sometimes there's more PhDs in Army infantry than there is in Army medical services. So, you never want to look at what the person's rank is. You want to look at what the person's job is and what they did. So to also go back and answer your question, now when I'm talking to transitioning service members about writing their resume, I tell them when you put it on your resume, just put the years of the service that you were in there and put, you were in the Army or you were in the Navy. And then don't put that you were an AW submarine tech. Don't put that you were in finance. Put in there that you have operational leadership experience. Put on there that you have marketing experience. Put on there that you have project management experience, and talk about those things. Hiring managers want to see deliverables. They want to know what you can do. They don't care that you can jump out of an airplane and liberate a small country.
Yeah. And a couple of things, Adam, you bring up there that I think they're just so key, right? So this is the next book I'm working on some future day, like how to help corporate America translate what they see in resumes. But one of the things that they don't see in a resume, because it's latent, right? And you mentioned it, military veterans have an exceptionally large or high or broad, deep, or whatever you want to say, aptitude for learning very technical stuff very fast that they apply in the field days after leaving their schoolhouses. I don't care if it's building a jet engine. I don't care if it's working on a nuclear reactor on a submarine. I don't care if it's, doing armory, building rounds in the Army. Like, it's high tech stuff. You guys leave Q school. You get to the first unit. I mean, you're doing mission within how long? Now, the training to make you is a long time, but you're expected to go hit the ground like running. So tell me, I don't know a company in corporate America that couldn't use hiring somebody that would be up to speed in 3.5 weeks flat after they hired them. That's the first thing that I don't think corporate America knows. The second thing, too, is you kind of started to unpack this, and maybe I'm going down the wrong rabbit hole, but, you're a vet. Okay, that means you held a gun. That means you shot somebody with it, and that means you're FUBAR because you're all jacked up because you shot somebody with a gun. That's what that means. And they're afraid of you. And the minute you knife hand them, like, now they know they're afraid of you, right? Okay. The other myth, too, that is just as insidious as that myth is, you're a military vet. That means you just follow orders. Okay, when we're in garrison, I wear my uniform the way I'm supposed to, and I follow the local instruction because commander said so, or the sergeant major said so, or whatever. But man, when you're deployed, when you're out in the field, when you're having to MacGyver that thing because you're in an austere environment. Oh, by the way, listeners, don't ever use that word or retrograde in front of a civilian. They have no idea what the hell you just said. But we're creative. MacGyver was a movie based on the military vet. Man, give me some bubble gum and duct tape in the field. I'll fix this thing. Like, we'll be back in action hunting bad guys when I'm done. Those are force multipliers. They're intangibles that we often don't see on resumes, and corporate America would eat that stuff up. They just don't know how to hire for it. And they don't even have a word for force multiplier, but man, they know it when they see it. You know what I mean? Any other myths?
No, go ahead with your other myth, and I'm gonna segue off of that.
No, but I mean, that was the other myth, right? They think, we just follow orders, right? They don't think we're creative. They don't think we think outside the box. They don't think it's hell or high water to get mission done. I mean, they just, in general, now I'm not broad brush stroking the entire civ div, but I mean, in general, that's, in my humble opinion, a myth that I see persist a lot.
So when in job interviews, HR managers tend to have a list of questions that they ask. And one of those questions is, tell us about a time. There's always, tell us about a time that you did this, or tell us about a time you did that. And one of the stories I use is when I was 25 years old, coming out of the PSYOP Q-Course and the SF Q-Course, and I got to my first detachment, I was taking a PSYOP detachment with 9th PSYOP Battalion, which is, at the time, there was one PSYOP group, and the 9th PSYOP Battalion was a tactical battalion. And each one of the detachments was either a SEAL detachment or a Ranger detachment or an SF detachment. Anyway, so I was, like you just said, I was a week within my company, and we were getting spun up to go to Iraq. This is, 6 months before anybody knew that we were going to be invading Iraq. And the first sergeant walks in, looks at me, and goes, "Hey, your detachment." I'm a 25-year-old E5 promotable. Goes, "I need to take your detachment. Everything you need to do, go requisition an aircraft, get your weapons, do everything, do all the aircraft hazmat," which anybody who's done it knows that that's a pain in the butt. And as a 25-year-old young E5 says, you need to do all this stuff. And that's stuff that typically, let's say an infantry battalion, that some major in the S3 shop is doing, and he's got a whole bunch of staff doing. So he's like, "Look, that's your detachment. You go do it." And I got 2 or 3 NCOs with me that I'm like, "Hey, you go do this, you go do that." To translate that into corporate America is like a guy at FedEx corporate saying, "Hey, I need you to go get a FedEx plane. I need you to go get 50 employees and go do this, this, and this. And you've only been here 3 days that you got hired with the company." It's being able to translate those things into the corporate speak that they need to understand. But how many 25-year-olds right out of college get asked to go do that for a company? Very, very, very few. They get stuck on a project management team. They get put behind a cubicle and called, "Sit down, shut up, and you go do, just watch this." So getting told you need to go requisition a C-130, put all your equipment on it. You need to forward deploy your guys to a foreign country, and when they're them to 3 other countries, you're 25 and you have this responsibility. So exactly what you're saying, being able to translate that into corporate ease in a job interview without sounding like a soldier, sailor, or airman, but putting that into corporate lingo and getting them to understand that. And how can I be an asset to your company by making me sound marketable to your company, is how to translate that.
And oh, by the way, all these folks that you're dealing with to help you, Adam, they're different ages, they're different backgrounds, they're different ranks. So the only way that's getting done is through subtle influence and servant leadership. That ain't getting done through Adam yelling and screaming about, "Hey, I'm the boss. See the rank on my sleeve." Like, that's another subtlety that corporate America is starved for, but they just don't realize the average vet is bringing them is, "Hey, I can work across ranks. I can work across age generations and gaps. I can work across functional teams because I can get shit done." If you want somebody solving problems to get shit done, I'm the guy. But how do you say that in an interview? How do you say that in your LinkedIn profile, right? How do you say that with the right acronyms? That's why we wrote this book. That's why we say it with the civilian acronyms. Hey, take out your SOF acronyms, take out your air defense acronyms, take out your combat medicine acronyms, talk like them. Your experience is just as germane. And in fact, you'll be running circles around people. But you've got to sound like them.
Speaking truth to power is another thing that veterans tended to be very good at, especially when they're in leadership positions. If any of your listeners have seen the movie 12 Strong about the horse soldiers in Afghanistan, the guy in that movie, Colonel Mulholland, and a lot of those guys with the ODAs and 5th Group, I was in language school when that was happening, but then we all met up again in Iraq, and those were my guys. Well, Colonel Mulholland was my boss, and who I reported to as his PSYOP attachment leader. There were many times I'd have to stand up in a staff briefing and say, "Hey, sir, this is how it is, and this is what we're doing." And they're in Western Iraq and Jordan and Baghdad, and that was my boss. And there was a couple times that we had SATCOM and have to talk to the SecDef as what we're doing. But when you're talking to people on that level, they want a no BS assessment as to what's going on. And to be able to go into a corporate boardroom and look at the CEO or look at the VP and say, "Hey, sir, this is what's going to happen," and not "This is what I need." No, this is what's going to happen. This is how I'm going to do it. And this is going to be the outcome, because corporations are looking for results. They don't want to know how you're going to do it. They don't want to BS around. They just want the results, because the bottom line is going to be profitability and what's going to happen, and not how to lose money. So if you can go in there and translate results and how it's going to happen, then you're going to have a job, and then you're going to get promoted.
Amen, brother.
Wow. Way to bring it to economy, right?
Yeah, that's it. And that's one of the biggest things that veterans have to understand is transitioning over is the military is going to be the easiest job you'll ever have, because mission accomplishment in the military means everybody goes home alive. Mission accomplishment in the civilian world means you get paid and somebody else gets paid, and there's a bottom line to meet. And if everybody's meeting their profitability margin, then no one's ever going to question what you do.
Yeah, well said. Well said. As we go forward and we're trying to give some of the tips and stuff that you've learned along the way that And you transitioned obviously during a pretty tumultuous time.
Yeah.
What would you say? I mean, obviously that affects things. So big Army, as far as DoD, focuses on the war. They're not focused on the transition of the individual. And in fact, my nephew right now is transitioning currently on a med board, and that's just a whole nother beast. So, you get marginalized. What did you do to help, I guess, mitigate that marginalization that you probably received when eyes were on war, not transition?
Well, like I said, I left active duty in 2005 and I went into the reserve, there was still that huge focus on what was going on in Iraq during that time. There were not a lot of programs. Wounded Warrior was just really kicking off during that time. Warriors to Work didn't even exist. And I was one of the lucky few who really had an ability to step right into another career with law enforcement. But for me, that wasn't a career. That was just a stepping stone while I was finishing school. And as I started looking at careers and looking at job placement, there wasn't any of that either. So as I started looking I was in Wilmington, North Carolina at the time, which was not the type of place for people like me as a transitioning veteran to be. I needed to be somewhere larger, Washington, D.C. or Raleigh or Charlotte. And I just happened to get with a company out of Washington, D.C., which allowed me to get around some of those people within government contracting to find those types of careers. There were tons of government contracting companies eating up veterans, but that was not the type of place that veterans needed to transition because they were just going right back into the same world. So getting involved with a company like Salesforce at the time, who was trying to start an organization like VetForce to help with the transition and helping those allowed me to see the greater picture of other veterans that were having those issues. And it wasn't so much what I was doing for myself, it was helping other veterans at the time with their needs and seeing that transition, which allowed me to look into some of my own psychological issues dealing with combat stress and post-traumatic stress that I had never addressed before, from having to see and losing my friends, having to see civilians die on the battlefield, that allowed me to go back and deal with my own issues at the same time. And not having those type of programs help other organizations set up those programs. I can't say enough about the Veterans Bridge Home in Charlotte, Charlotte being a huge melting pot for veterans and organizations in that area to open up programs like that and just have the type of people that can get together and talk about it and network and influence. And now places in Florida, Jacksonville is starting to get to that area where veterans can get together and network and talk and have those type of organizations to get together. So I know it's a long way to get around answering your question, but at the time, there just weren't a lot of opportunities for veterans to find those things. And Wounded Warrior, being what it is now, was starting to offer some of those opportunities. And then other organizations grew out of that that offered some of those opportunities.
Wow, that's cool. And so so now that you've done it, now looking back, right? Sight is usually 2020, looking back. There were probably some landmines that you stepped on that people can learn from. And there's probably some things that you wish you would have done differently. Give me just a couple, like one of the things that you wish you could have not done, and then something you wish you would have done.
I think I would have focused on my mental health a lot quicker. Understanding being a soldier, I think we look at being soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and think, we're a lot stronger than we are. We're not. Relying on my friends a lot more. Sometimes I feel like I became a better soldier after I left the military because I grew up. I'm 44 now, and we're very young. We're invincible when we're young. And I knocked out half my education when I was younger. I wish I'd have knocked out a whole lot more. It'd have been a lot easier to knock out a master's when I was 24 and even a PhD. But getting the education quickly, because corporations look at education. They don't care what it's in, they just look at it. Getting certifications, getting my master project manager a whole lot earlier, getting other certifications a whole lot earlier, understanding that that's what corporate America is looking for, and just understanding how to play the corporate game. But going back to the mental health aspect, making sure that I was squared away first inside and then focusing on the outside. And once that was taken care of, then I could take care of everything else. And that was a struggle for years, being able to transition from one life to the other. And having a break in service, going back into the Guard with South Carolina, I just missed it. I missed the people, I missed the camaraderie, I missed the job, and I just needed a few more years to finish that transition, to bring closure to my career. And that helped a lot, but it also helped me close the loop and deal with some things, and finally realize that I missed the Army, but I didn't miss it that much. So I was able to make a lot more connections with the corporate world, and it allowed me to eventually move to where I am now. But going back, and if I could go back and tell myself what I did before, education was the key, mental health was the key, and getting out and making those connections and getting involved in as many civic organizations as I could to make those connections for the transition getting out.
What great advice, right? So, I mean, if you didn't, just to kind of recap what he said, if you didn't hear it and you didn't process it, deal with the mental aspect of the transition, really the transformation, right? Because you're going to become a new person, and the walls that you've built and all the crap that you've stuffed in them, when you change your dynamic, a lot of times is when those walls come crumbling down. So it's like happens at the worst time possible when you don't have your support network. But two, education, start on it early. The more you get while Uncle Sam is covering it, and you've got more time than you really realize while you're in, you never get less busy, right? It just doesn't work that way. You're just going to get more and more busy. So putting it off till I'll do that later. Do it while you're deployed. Do it while you're off on mission. I mean, you can manage both when you're young. You have the fuel in the tank at that point. And then, just dealing with your network, right? I love that too. I mean, you're building a civic network, not a military network. Not to say that you throw those old military networks away, but creating a new network that is civil-based or civilian-based really tends to pay dividends, at least from everybody I've talked to. It's like 75% of jobs, I think is the statistic, are made through connections, not your resume. So meaningful, deep connections. Well said.
Yeah, there's probably a dozen guys that I keep up with from the community. There's a Facebook group that we started, almost 15 years ago, called Armament Dogs. There were 12 guys in my very first platoon back in 3101 Aviation. We started just to keep up with us. I think there's over 6,000 members now. And it's gotten to be so big that even the schoolhouse at Fort Rucker uses it for training and transition. And that was just kind of a surprise of how much those networking circles can grow. And some of the guys that I was on the teams with, we still communicate. One of the guys is a ROTC instructor at one of the major universities. Some of the guys are at the Pentagon. And, when you keep up these connections, you never know where some of these other connections are going to lead to. And they can be very lucrative in the future. So, don't forget some of your buddies and where they can be. And one of the sergeants major that I came up under when I was a young staff sergeant, he wound up working for me later on a job site. So, sometimes these guys are going to come to you and say, hey, can you give me a job? And the guys that you work for, they may work for you later on. So you never know who's going to work for you down the road once you get into corporate America. And sometimes things turn around. When one of the events we went to the other day here in Jacksonville, I was talking to a Navy Command Master Chief who was looking for a job. And he goes, hey, can you hire me? And, we're trying to get him hired onto a position. And he's a Navy Command Master Chief. He was in charge of destroyers over at Mayport. And now he's looking for entry-level jobs. So, these are the big top dogs that don't know what to do now because they're trying to find entry-level positions. So, it gets very humbling very quickly. But another thing that I can also say is, never forget who you're married to, because every day I put that person first. And if it wasn't for her and the teamwork that we do, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing now. So,
and so finding a new purpose, finding a new mission, right? Finding a new way to matter and contribute is a challenge. But I like not only JB was talking about your civil network, but if your civil network is made up of things like a FAVOB or a nonprofit or something that allows you to be active, make a contribution, contribute an impact, and do something greater than yourself, you still get those tidbits of serving, right?
Yeah. And something that we discussed earlier, with your organization, Vets to PM. When he said something earlier about what I could go back and do earlier with project management. Oh my gosh, I can't think of one career over the last 15 years where having a project management certification has not been top on the resume. I got with the American Academy of Project Management years ago because I found out they were military centric, and got the MPM knocked out years ago. I know you focus on PMP, and that right there has been one of the number one hiring tools for almost everything I have done over the last 15 plus years in corporate America. And I did the Google project manager a while back just because I was working on a Google project manager or Google project. But I can tell you the project manager certification, or whichever way you do it, has been the number one tool I have used in almost every job I've ever done, no matter what it is. And your organization with Vets to PM is going to be one of the most critical tools I can see for any veteran to use in the upcoming future.
And that's why we offer more than one project management credential. There's all kinds of credentials all over the world. What a credential says to corporate America is, I need somebody that can organize a team to solve a temporary problem. And then when it goes away, they go back to operations. There is no SOP. I need them to creatively figure this out. That's project management. I don't care if you're developing a new product. I don't care if you're developing a new good or service. I don't care if you're developing a new process. It's all project management. How you plan and deliver the project is what changes. So to your point, Adam, I don't really care what project management credential you have on it. I don't care what body it's from. What it says to the employer is, if you need somebody to do operational work, I can do that. I can come in and follow an SOP and contribute to mission every day. Oh, by the way, you're getting two folks for the price of one, because I also can do temporary unique endeavors as well. I can put together a team. I can work across age generation gaps. I can work across ranks structure. I can work across functional departments. So you're getting somebody that can do projects, make a plan. You're getting somebody that can follow SOPs, run a shop, and they only have to pay you one salary. So, hey, you're getting, instead of 90 here and 90 there for $1.80, how about you just hire me for $1.25? We split the difference. Everybody's happy. You know what I mean? The credential just says I can do that stuff, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, they're not going to hire us based on the badges on our uniform. We're going to have to put the time in to get those credentials. So,
that's right. Credentials are those ribbons and tabs on our collars and our sleeves and our chest, right? That's how civilians identify each other.
Yeah, well said. Well said. You walk into the room, you immediately know as a military member, well, who's in the room, where you stand, but not so much in the civilian world. So it takes those credentials, and like you said earlier in the show, Adam, was the education. It doesn't really matter where you get the education or what the education's in, but they look for phase gates. Does he have his associates? Okay, does he have his, bachelor's? Does he have a master's? Does he have a PhD? So they're looking for that kind of stuff, and that's it's distinction. It's the same way we did in the military. Have they completed their primary training? Have they done advanced training? Are they getting good PT scores? Like, it's all phase gate for promotion. It's all phase gate for, additional responsibilities and positions. It's not that different once we internally start to think about, okay, how can I translate this to the civilian and business world? And I like what you said, in case anybody else missed it. In the interview, don't focus on your job title and what you did in the military. Focus on what you delivered, and that general sense of, I led this and the outcome was that. And here's the result for the bottom line of the business. And that's the way the business thinks anyway. So you're already showing them that you can think like a business manager. So I really like it.
Yeah, that deliverable right there is something I like to go back to as a young staff sergeant. One of the sergeants major, actually the one I said worked for me later on, he was very good at taking young non-commissioned officers and have them sign for everything. If there was $2 or $3 million worth of equipment that somebody else in the leadership structure was supposed to sign for, he would say, no, let this young guy sign for it, and let's see if he can keep accountability of it. And he did that because that would translate later on into a really good NCOER bullet point, which he taught us that we could show that on civilian resumes later on. And that's something I still put on a civilian resume, is like, hey, I kept accountability of $3 million worth of equipment over a 2-year period. And that translates into, okay, well, I kept a $3 million profitability line for a large corporate structure, and it's a way to translate it in there. So that goes over really well in a job interview.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Hey, as we wrap this up, Doc and I like to bring up, what kind of are some of the books that you've read that were inspirational or gave a lot of meaning? Anything professional reading is in play here, or a class or anything. So just to put you on the spot.
Oh, goodness. Well, if it comes to sales, a very good buddy of mine is a retired senior chief with SEAL Team 6, and he put me through the SEAL 6 sales method that they had developed. He's a master sales trainer. Unfortunately, he had an accident here recently, so he's not doing very good, but he based his stuff off of Tom Hopkins. Tom Hopkins is a master sales trainer. Also, the 1 Minute Sales Manager, or the 1 Minute Salesman, and the 1 Minute Manager are amazing books for people getting into management and into sales. Who Moved My Cheese is a very, very good book for anybody that has an issue with change or needs to adapt to change. Those are just really good ones to start out with. 1 Minute Manager, 1 Minute Salesman, Who Moved My Cheese, and then anything by Tom Hopkins. Listening to videos, listening to sales, listening to techniques, because whether you're a real estate agent, whether you're a car salesman, you're going to have to understand sales, because you could be an executive, you could be an entry-level person at a company. You're going to have to sell yourself, and you're going to have to sell a project to somebody in operations in a company. And you're going to have to deal with objections. You're going to have to deal with no. You're going to have to be able to walk into a boardroom and sell something. So understand that no matter what you do in an organization, you're going to have to sell yourself or sell a product or sell a project. And if you don't understand how to overcome the objections and be able to overcome being told no, then you need to start learning now.
Great advice. Doc, anything for the parting shots?
Man, I would just put a little bit of highlight under those books. Those books, when Jeremy and I, if you're listening and not watching, Jeremy and I were grinning from ear to ear. As a business professor for years, and I've worked in government and private sector and startups and, Fortune 500s, there's almost no hiring manager or nobody you can meet at a network event that's not read one of those books or knows somebody that's read one of those books. So if you just drop that in a conversation, man, that networking conversation just got a lot deeper, a lot richer, a lot warmer. And, so Adam, what great examples, dude. Like almost every one of them you drop, like, yeah, read that one twice. Yep. Read that one 10 years ago. Yep. Read that one last year. So good stuff. So if you need to hit rewind and listen to Adam drop those books again, JB usually puts them in the links too for you, because JB's just awesome like that. But yeah, great books, man. Good networking conversation pieces.
Yeah. Great. Anything, Adam, that you want to leave us with?
I just appreciate the opportunity to be on the show. My information or my contact information is at OSPREYSafety.com, just like the bird, OSPREY safety.com. Anybody can contact me there anytime for veteran networking, for job advice, for reference, resume help, HR questions, anything. If you're a veteran, reach out to me. If you want to get into the industry, let me know. I'll be glad to help you out.
And I know we hit it at the very beginning of the show. What and you kind of already told them, reach out for advice, reach out for any kind of mentoring, reach out for employment tips and tricks. What does your company primarily focus on?
So I do environmental health and safety risk management consulting. I work with general industry and construction companies for their insurance risk management. I work with their insurance producers, their insurance companies, to keep them in the good graces of workers' comp insurance, property casualty, general liability, anything that will put them at risk. Sometimes they hire their own people in-house. I typically handle their third party. I do their inspections, their OSHA inspections, their fire marshal inspections. If they have an accident or injury, I handle their post-accident injury inspections for OSHA, for workers' comp claims management. And any type of training for municipalities, police departments, fire departments. There's all kinds of training under 1910 and 1926 OSHA that I do that some of these agencies don't typically handle for themselves.
Man, that's great.
So JB, I just heard he covers about 30% of the military occupations and jobs you could hold right now if you're out there listening, right? Like think of the ranks and think of the types of jobs, standards and compliance, evals, like, just think about it. think about what he just said and think, whoa, you mean there's a civilian career field where I can make meaningful and lucrative and use the skills that I've already spent time and effort developing? Okay, go.
Yeah,
for
the
sure.
Navy and the Air Force actually have specific jobs that do that. The Army and Marine Corps have additional duties for that, but it can all translate over, and I can show these guys how to get into the civilian world and translate all that over.
Too cool.
Yeah. That's exactly where I was going in my mind, is like, what is the 1 or 2 certs that would get them started to find out if they're interested in it? You got any recommendations for that?
Yeah, I can show them how to get their OSHA 10 hour, 30 hour, their OSHA 500, show them how to go to a couple of different companies like the OSH Academy, getting their 132 hour, their 210 hour, getting their MPM, getting some EPA certifications, getting LEED. I mean, there's a list that I can send to people to do while they're on active duty, and they can transition right into a $60,000 to $100,000 job coming right off active duty, entry level. It's easy money.
All right. OSPREYSafety.com and get some mentorship in that. And we'll talk more about maybe standing up a skill bridge pipeline that would help people utilize all that OSHA goodness and then be able to translate it. Because I see a natural fit. We've talked to, building safety and everything else, and it just makes sense. But thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate your time. I thought excellent words of wisdom, and I hope everybody got a lot out of it.
All right. I appreciate it.
See you at the next FAVOB event, brother.
Hey, yes, sir. We'll see you there.
All right, man.
Thank you for tuning in and spending a bit of time with us at the Military Transition Academy, powered by Vets to PM. If we piqued your interest, but you want more details, please head over to the website vetstopm.com and see if we can help prepare you for a better tomorrow or a future meaningful and lucrative career.